welcome. In today's episode, I'm going to continue Jay's story, who shared his experiences in an area of California near Joshua Tree National Park with an update he emailed to me. The video featuring his story is called The Devil Was There. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend watching it, as it includes some trail cam pictures of what he believes to be a reptilian cryptid. I will put a link to part 1 in the description below. I agreed with him after he sent me the pictures, but I definitely do after what he sent me recently, which I will share in this episode. In his update, Jay also included 2 stories from co-workers who heard about encounters in the same area. I will share those first, then Jay's update and another experience he had while camping in the canyons. Jay also sent me a lot of pictures of the area where the bizarre encounters happened, which I will include in this episode to give you a better idea of what these canyons look like. These pictures were all taken by Jay. I'd also like to thank Jay and his co-workers for allowing me to share their stories and pictures on my channel. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel, click on the join button below. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story is a quick one, but just adds to the strangeness of the canyons near Joshua Tree National Park. It also further points to the fact that there is something strange going on in that part of California. Jay starts by saying that he shared his cave encounter from part 1 with a few co-workers. In hearing his story, 2 of them were reminded of strange encounters they had heard and shared those stories with him. His email detailing his co-worker's story reads as follows. The first co-worker stated the following encounter he heard about. He stated that a previous worker in our department, I'll call him John, told him of a creepy encounter he experienced in the canyons. I won't disclose too much information about John. I will say, however, he is part of management in our department. He went out with a few friends to hunt desert mule. I will add I was not given a date for this encounter, only that it happened many years ago. John and his friends drove deep into the canyons and spent several nights out there. On one particular night, as they had a few beers by their bonfire, they heard something running towards them in the dark. They could hear the footsteps on the desert sand. To their astonishment, a small humanoid creature ran right in front of them and into the darkness. They made out its features as it got close enough to be seen by the bonfire light. John swears it was a humanoid. Small, maybe 2 to 3 feet tall creature running bipedal. John stated it ran into the darkness and disappeared inside the nearby canyons. He and his friends were dumbfounded at witnessing such a strange creature. For those of you who have seen part 1 and saw the pictures of the creature from inside the cave that Jay and his family had the misfortune of running into while exploring, the humanoid in this story is completely different and makes me think there is more than one cryptid in those canyons. I've spoken with Jay about this and he thinks this is the case as well. This area of California seems to be a hotspot for cryptid activity. This is far from the first story I've heard where there are multiple sightings of different types of creatures in the same area. A landscape such as this with a lot of canyons and caves would be the perfect spot, being that there are so many places to hide. Plus, there is no telling how far down the caves go, which would make a perfect place for them to inhabit and go undetected. What would you do if an unwelcome visitor such as this came running through your camp one night? The next story, according to Jay, is quote, creepy and disturbing to say the least. It happened to a friend of his co-worker who had a terrifying encounter with something in the desert while on a camping trip. The story, as written by Jay, reads as follows. My co-worker recalled a good friend of his telling him the following. He told him about a camping trip when he took to the canyons with friends and family. He told my co-worker that it was late at night when they started hearing something moving around their campsite. They were by the bonfire talking and at first ignored the sound, thinking it was a fox or a coyote. As the sound continued, they noticed a silhouette moving on all fours just outside the bonfire light. It was, however, close enough to be noticed. We were sure it was a coyote moving around in the dark and paid no mind about it. We continued talking and laughing when we started noticing that it wasn't just moving around aimlessly, but we picked up purpose to its movement. To explain better, it was slowly moving forward straight to us, but in a slow, methodical manner. At this point, we all stopped talking and just stared at what we thought was a coyote. When all of a sudden, it stopped moving, stayed completely still, and without any notice, jumped straight up, landed on 2 feet like a human, and ran off into the canyons at a speed that was baffling to say the least. It was grayish in color, about 7 to 8 feet tall and thin. His friend stated it ran away like a person, it wasn't a coyote. He also added we were too scared to stay outside and went into our trailers. They ended up leaving because they were so disturbed and frightened after witnessing that creature run away. Jay then adds, I'm glad I've shared my encounter with others. Now I have heard 3 encounters that prove my theory that there are other unexplained encounters people have out in those canyons. The pieces of the puzzle start falling into place. There is definitely something unknown lurking or living deep within the caves in those canyons, very possibly different types of cryptids. When I first read this story, I was thinking Dogman due to them thinking they were looking at a coyote. They didn't say if it had a dog-like head or fur though, so maybe it was just a figure they saw in the dark on all 4s and thought it to be a coyote since they inhabit the area. Whatever the case may be, we have yet another sighting in these canyons of what seems to be something completely different than what Jay's nephew saw in the cave and what he captured on his trail cam. I will say that it could be the same creature, but again, them saying that they thought they were seeing a coyote makes me think it was something else entirely. As for my thoughts on these encounters, I'm going to share with you what I told Jay. I'm sure it feels good to get that proof that there is indeed something or more than one something lurking around out there. I mentioned in a recent episode how it's good to not be alone when having an encounter and having others who experience the same thing or something similar, because our minds in trying to rationalize seeing something like that tend to make us second guess if we actually did. I know this doesn't really apply to you because you weren't alone during your group's encounter, but it's still nice to get that vindication. What do you think was walking around their camp that night? The next story is an update from Jay on the cave where he and his family had their encounter. Upon flying his drone into the area, he made a startling, potentially concerning discovery. His email reads as follows. I went to the canyons yesterday and flew my drone, specifically over the cave entrance where we had our encounter. To my surprise, the small opening is gone. It's no longer small. It has turned into an 8+ foot tall opening in my estimation. I will get a true size once I put boots on the ground. But even from the drone picture I took, the entrance looks massive now compared to the previous opening. I will include before and after pictures. Keep in mind I hadn't gone back in over 7 months. I'm baffled by what caused this change. I dare think, did whatever lives inside that cave get bigger, requiring a larger opening to exit from? Or might it have been caused due to the tropical storm dumping massive amounts of water on us? Again, I'll get more data once we go explore the cave soon. Also, I inverted the trail cam picture on the creature's face. I compared it to the eyeshine picture. If you notice in the eyeshine picture, the eyes are wide apart. The inverted picture shows that exact feature. Both pictures eerily coincide in this manner. It's disappointing that the top part of the head is dark. We can't see its true shape, but if I could venture a guess, I believe this creature has the pronounced reptilian brow ridge. I'll include a picture so you can see what I mean. Also, I think the reason the trail cam didn't capture a full and clear image might have to do with the creature's claws being so close to the lens. They take up a good amount of the light. Let me know what you think. As for my thoughts on this update, I will also share what I told Jay. I'm sure seeing the cave entrance drastically changed was quite a shock. That really is baffling. The most recent picture taken from your drone makes it look as if it's narrower than it was before. I could be wrong though, and it could just be the angle. My first guess would be erosion. Like you said, you guys did have a tropical storm move through the area, which I'm sure brought a ton of rain. But for it to change that drastically makes me second guess that. If whatever is in there was able to alter the cave entrance like that, it would require a lot of strength. But most cryptids are usually described as being very strong. I'll be very interested to see what you find when you get a closer look. Just be careful. I would usually advise against going back to an area where an encounter took place, but you seem to know what you're doing and you're very careful about it. What do you think caused the drastic change in the cave entrance? Erosion or something else? The final story of this episode is another encounter Jay had in the canyons while camping with his family. It would seem that they too had an unwelcome, unknown visitor come to their camp. His encounter, as written by him, reads as follows. A few years ago, we decided to camp out in the canyons. Yes, the same canyons we found the cave in, just in a different spot. There were several of us that night. If my memory serves me right, there were 8 of us. My son and I, several of my nephews, my niece, and my older cousin. We arrived early and spent all day enjoying the usual camping activities. We were the only people camping out that day. As nightfall came, it felt pretty eerie being the only people out there. Although, as I've mentioned, I enjoy the solitude. Nonetheless, I don't mind having a few neighbors scattered about, especially when darkness falls. It was a cold and moonless night in the low 40s. The dark was still and very quiet. Our minds were quick to put that to the side as we sat near the warmth of our bonfire. Some of us enjoyed a cup of hot coffee while others enjoyed hot cocoa. We were immersed in laughter and conversation, enjoying delicious food as well. The beautiful night sky full of gorgeous stars shining down on us promptly helped us forget that we were out in the Badlands all alone. Or so we thought. It was about 11:30 when the dark silence behind us was interrupted by the sound of someone walking. A few in our group had retired for the night, so we presumed someone had gone to relieve themselves. We continued talking and about 2 minutes went by when we heard the same sound of footsteps again. This time I got up and checked the tents. To my surprise, all of them were accounted for and fast asleep. I went back and told the others that our earlier assumption that it was one of them was wrong. We then waited quietly and sure enough we heard the crunching footsteps again, walking behind us in the pitch dark. We quickly grabbed our flashlights and a spotlight and began shining them around. We were expecting to see someone standing by where we last heard the footsteps, but to our surprise there was no one there. We kept asking each other what might be making that sound. There was no doubt in any of us that what we were hearing was bipedal footsteps. By now we were on edge. The darkness of the night suddenly seemed darker and more ominous. I told everyone not to panic, to remain calm. I reminded them that there is strength in numbers. I really doubt my words helped much since everyone had an unnerved look on their faces. But nonetheless, I managed to get everyone to sit back down and start talking again. And yet again, after a few minutes, the footstep sounds started again behind us. This time we grabbed our 12 gauge and a few other pieces and proceeded to walk toward the sound. We spread out and covered some good ground. We stayed in groups of 2, spread about 15 feet apart. This time we were determined to find the source of those sounds. After about 10 minutes of looking, we found nothing. To add to the strangeness, we didn't find one single print in the sand. We were utterly astonished, to say the least. We started joking that we had a ghost messing with us to lessen the fright we all felt. After we hesitantly went back to sit around the bonfire, we determined that we had to do a night watch for our security. We stayed up in twos and rotated every 2 hours. The remainder of the night was uneventful. After hearing the account my friend told me, the one with the creature crawling around in the dark and running off bipedal, I have to wonder if that's what was out there that night with us in the dark. He included with this email a video that gives us an example of footsteps they heard that night. This video is not from that night, and the footsteps heard in it belong to the person carrying the recording device. It is just to give us an example of what they heard that night. Loud and clear footsteps on the desert sand. Once again, for my thoughts on this encounter, I will share what I told Jay. I normally find stories like this where the people involved don't actually see anything creepier than when they do. I guess it's the mystery of knowing that something is out there and it is left up to our imagination on what it might be. And I can't count how many stories I've heard where people hear footsteps and then look only to find none anywhere. The level of stealth cryptids employ is baffling. And sometimes, even when they see a creature standing and go look at the spot later, there are still no prints. I'm just glad it eventually left without further incident and everyone was okay. Jay's response to my thoughts reads as follows. Yes, I agree these encounters are baffling and disturbing. You mentioned the stealth these creatures are known for. It's almost as if they are toying with us. These creatures are confident in their ability to rarely be seen or recorded for that matter. And the fact that there are no confirmed bones or bodies of these cryptids is a testament to their intelligence. We are truly dealing with creatures that we have very little knowledge or understanding of. And just an FYI, I'm taking a step back on entering the cave. I feel that I need to be very careful and calculated from this point on. There is no doubt in my mind that I have discovered a certain abode, if I may, these cryptids dwell in. I will, however, go take video on the outside and leave my trail cameras around the area. That is the end of Jay's email. As I mentioned earlier, I don't recommend that people go back to an area where they've had an encounter. In fact, I usually advise against it. In this case though, Jay seems to have a handle on the situation and is very careful about what he is doing in those canyons. He also mentioned something that I want to make note of, and that is trusting his instinct or trusting his gut. It's telling him that he needs to limit his time in the cave and be very careful moving forward. He should definitely listen to that feeling. I've heard numerous stories where these beings take an interest in people who continue to go into their territory, so it's a good idea for him to limit going into the cave in the future. I would, however, recommend staying out of the cave altogether, even if it is light out. As he said, these beings toy with us and seem to want to lure us out into their territory for who knows what. Nothing good, I would imagine. He also never goes into the canyons alone, which is a good thing. One thing I've noticed about these creatures trying to lure us deeper into the woods or out into the darkness of the canyon in this case is that they usually try to get people alone. Continuing to monitor the area with trail cams and drones seems to be the safest way to go here. I look forward to seeing if the trail cams can catch a picture of anything else in the area. And I'm sure Jay will keep me updated if anything else happens out there, and as long as it continues to be alright with him, I will continue to share his findings on my channel. I'd also like to thank him again for letting me share what he has sent me so far. I'd also again like to thank the coworkers for letting me share their stories. What do you think about the stories coming out of this canyon near Joshua Tree National Park in California? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.